Hey, it's Kristen with Collision Hub, and welcome to Repair University Live, our third episode in the series. And today we're going to be talking about probably one of my most favorite things, and that's estimating and understanding the guides to estimating. So I always tell a shop, there's only one thing you do that brings in money, and well, that's writing estimates. So I've brought in the two estimating experts, my estimating mentor, Roger, you unfortunately got stuck with me in 1995, and the estimating guru, Larry. So between the three of us, I think we're going to have a great discussion today. Now keep in mind, it is only an hour. This is one of these topics that we could go on and on about for days, weeks even, I think, if we covered it all. So first, we're going to start off by talking about the guide to estimating for all three systems. It's important that no matter what you're writing in your facility or what you're writing as an adjuster, that you definitely understand the three systems and that you understand what those three systems are based on. So guys, let's real quick just start going through the premises of the labor time. So we can just explain to everybody those labor times that we sometimes like and we sometimes hate.
Yep.
What are they based on?
Well, they're based on the replacement of new parts on an undamaged vehicle. And I know for a lot of you that are watching in right now, you're saying to yourself, well, we don't fix undamaged vehicles. But the databases, in order to maintain consistency in the time approach, has to consider things as on a platform of undamaged. And so that's where it's going to take it from. The one thing I want to point out and just give you an example of how this thing works, if you take a look at this one right here where it says damage access, what it's talking about there is that if I have a vehicle, for example, like this car behind us, and let the damage actually cause the door to be hit and it won't open like this, then that's a problem. That's damage access. If I can use the database based on new parts on a new undamaged car, the door should open every time like that in order for that time to apply properly. That's just one quick example.
Right. So this is Mitchell's explanation of their labor times. Again, same thing. Replacement times are new and undamaged panels on new and undamaged vehicles, which really isn't what we do. And so any time that you're dealing with a damaged vehicle, which is what we do,
yep, there
may be additional times and extra considerations that need to be added to the estimate to make sure that we get it to that level playing field at which those labor times are based on. And we'll take a look at CCC, what they have, same thing.
Something very similar. You know, and keep in mind, when let's say we're replacing a quarter panel, for example, if I have damage to a C-pillar or a wheelhouse, that repair time that you consider in your assessment is to restore that part back to a new undamaged condition again so that you can install that part appropriately.
You know, Larry, as you look at this, and we'll go look at Audatex real quick, same thing, not as descriptive as the other two, but basically new and undamaged parts on new and undamaged vehicles. What are some of the things that you see that shops kind of get wrong when they start writing estimates right out of the gate because of a lack of understanding of the labor premises?
There's probably three main categories. One is they don't know their own estimating system or database system, the rules of what's included, what's not included. And yes, they are a guide, but with that guide, it's the guide on how to use it. You wouldn't use a Toyota Camry owner's manual to try and work the radio or some options in a Toyota Corolla. They're both Toyotas, but you know there's differences there. So it is a guide to that point. And stuff can be changed. Obviously, we've seen it in the DEG numerous times. Times have been changed or statements have been changed. The three of them get this pretty similar, and I think they need to start talking to each other, or I'm not saying form a committee for it, but they should maybe even listen to us and say, okay, you know what, hey guys, why don't you guys give us an idea of what we should have in there? At least cover the same type of things. They should read each other's and say, okay, this is what we're including. At least they got the 6 minutes are correct across all three. And you do have where it's on a new undamaged part with new undamaged, going on a new undamaged vehicle. The idea is you got to start someplace. Now they all do say that collision access, pulls, this, that, the other thing are not included, and you have to take that into effect. If you can't operate the door like Roger said under normal practices, then you'd have to add some time to it. Now that could either be I have to get somebody to cross over the center divider and push from the inside. It might be I have to lower the window and yank on it a little bit harder, which you may not be charging for that. But if you have to go ahead and pry it open or even cut open the door and break the lock apart, now you're talking a lot extra labor that has to be involved that's not included in that.
Right. So having a good understanding of those guides really helps us even just get started.
And here's the thing, when you use wording to build up your estimate, you want to use the nomenclature that is used in the guides so that this way you can support your position.
Yeah, it's always, it was always interesting, some of the arguments that I used to get between my adjusters and the repair shops we were working with was just that issue. We were talking out of two different Bibles, and not even on the same field. And at the end of the day, when we got on the same field, we usually found a way to.
That was my second, thing that I let you guys bring up, is that you're coming in to write an estimate for your company, and you write on Audatex, and I write on CCC. And a lot of times both the shop and the adjuster get into this whole argument based on nonsense, because you're trying to compare apples to oranges.
Exactly.
And the included items on one system may not be included on the other, and vice versa. For example, I see guys say, well, and I'll just pick out Audatex, paid 7 hours for this particular job. Well, CCC is only paying 5 hours for this particular job. Well, CCC doesn't include some of the extra things that Audatex might have. But then you don't argue the fact that Audatex paid you 5 hours to paint something and CCC only paid you, 3 hours to, we'll skip over that one because, and so that's, you have to take a look at each system. So if you're going to discuss it with somebody else and you're going to have that open discussion, you need to understand all three database systems, and it's easy to find. You go to the DEG, web.org, you go to the drop down for toolbox, and it has all three links to the database system. So at least get familiarized with them and understand what they're saying. Like Roger said, you want to use the same terminology so that you're on the same page.
Yeah.
And so that you have an understanding of these P pages, the one thing you also want to consider too is that they do change. So what we may have had last year as a write-up for something, through clarity, through the input from DEG and folks like you in the audience, you want to go back and look at them often. So during your daily exercises, know what they say, get used to it, and every time you go to the DEG, see if they've made an update. The update's going to give you more detail. The P pages from my existence, going back 40-some years ago, started out with 2 pages. Now they're in the hundreds. So there's a reason for that. They're adding more clarity to the repairs being performed.
Right, the car's getting more complicated, and we're going to need that.
Yes.
And that brings up a great segue for something else that we think is really important that you guys understand. I get asked all the time, where do the labor times, basically, what's that based on? We knew on undamaged cars, but really, where's that time come from? How does that labor study work? And is there an industry standard? And we see industry standard thrown around a lot and misused. And what's really interesting is all three of the database consider the OEM standard to be the industry standard.
And that's the only standard there is. There is no independent standard, because you got to remember, a standard is lowering the bar to the most acceptable point. And one standard at one shop may not be the standard at another shop. It's like restaurants. It's the same type of thing. Outback standard may not be the same as a standard of one of the high-end steakhouses,
right.
The way they run practices. So in this case, a lot of the OEMs are now saying that you have to follow the vehicle makers' procedures. You have to follow their equipment, their materials, their stuff. And even here, CCC blatantly says what I've been saying for years. It's, some operations that are reported in this guide are beyond your scope of ability. You don't have the equipment, you don't have the knowledge. Just because you've been doing it for 30 years doesn't mean you're doing it right. We see it all the time on Facebook. Right. Guys are still clipping cars, and they think it's okay because I know what I'm doing. I know how I know how to weld. And you look at their welds, and those aren't even good. There's some shops out there right now that can't even fix a 1960s Ford Galaxy properly. Forget about one of these newer cars with all the new types of steels and different strengths of them.
Right.
So getting back to CCC here, one of the things we want to talk to you about is that it's using the latest factory information to create their guides and perform their time studies. So it does vary from car to car. It's not opinion anymore. It's what the car companies recommend, because they want to have a safety and quality outcome of success. That's why they're doing this. And then it says procedure that followed, but also the skill and knowledge. That means that the technician performing the skills and knowledge to that vehicle at that given year, because even though you may be fixing a BMW from 2009, the 2017 might be totally out of your league. And where it comes down here and says that, it says some repairs, basically, you don't have to accept everything. You do the jobs that you're certified, or not certified for, but trained to.
Right, exactly. And it goes on a little bit more in care, because it talks about the extreme care and caution, because these are the 4 things that we want to make sure we're taking care of in these repairs. Now, here's what I like about this the most. Not only do we know that our repair times are based on the OEM procedures with the right OEM equipment, but in a way, our database providers are giving us a way to help with our negotiations when it comes to repairing the cars correctly.
Absolutely.
So if someone comes in my facility and begins to tell me what they feel an industry standard is, or maybe, well, so-and-so down the street does it differently, or my favorite, you're the only one that asked for it this way, well, quite frankly, I may be the only one in that territory that's qualified to give an opinion and fix the car, and therefore, will I become the standard? And so that's a really great, I'm very proud of CCC for what they've done here. And I think it's an often missed piece of data in our guides that we should be using more on a regular basis.
You know, when you say the only one, consider this, that if you are following all these steps here, you should be able to validate that. And so if I have researched all these things out and the competition down the road who claims to fix the same type of car hasn't done so, is it really apples and apples at that point?
Yep.
Is the person really applying the right skills to get the outcome of success for that car?
Right. If they're not certified, if they haven't taken the classes and they don't own the equipment, well, then I can't be compared to them. So,
well, you got to take a look at, that's why some of these manufacturers are now having the difference between your overused word of certified and the real certified programs. The real certified programs are restricting parts. They're not letting anyone buy them except their shops. They're making a big advertising about it to the people who purchase these vehicles and say, look, we want to make sure that all these procedures that are in these database systems are being followed by Audatex to keep the resale value, as it said before, exactly where it's supposed to be, to keep it to that high standard that your vehicle is repaired properly as the way we say it because of these different mixes of materials. But the biggest thing is that the safety's still built into the car.
Right.
I've seen on Facebook, I've seen guys get a used radiator support, and it's a different year but the same model, and the airbag sensor, the satellite sensor's in a different location. They drill a hole and screw it on.
yeah, just move that.
Yeah, we'll just move it because, you know, it's just a monitor. It's an accelerometer, you imbecile. And they have no science behind. They just go, well, I can do it. I never had a problem. Guess what? Most of the stuff that goes to court, they don't bother going back after because they have somebody else that they can put the blame on and don't have to search this out and open up a Pandora's box. So that's why the Audatex, CCC, and Mitchell are stressing now. In the last 2 years, they've actually changed this a few times. Follow the manufacturer's recommendations. Follow the paint company's recommendations. You know, follow this, follow that. That's how these things are based. And if there's a mistake, you guys don't think it's got a labor time. Sometimes it's a cut and paste issue. Sometimes it's oh, well, we didn't realize it went from steel to aluminum. Call up the DEG, tell the DEG, put in an inquiry, and let them, and they'll help you fix it and make it the right way.
Right, and again, just to bring that home a little more, this is Audatex's procedures where they talk through it. And the one thing I like about what Audatex has done here is that they also acknowledge what iCar's contribution is into determining and helping with those repair times. And it was great in one of the classes. I believe it was in one of your classes, one of the iCar people on the board of directors at AASP stood up and said, hey, I just want to make sure everyone understands that the iCar standard is the OEM standard, and that standard is our estimating standard, and that's our repair standard, and that's what we're going with. And
well, the big thing with iCar is iCar tries to grab all the different OEM information and kind of slam it together in a generalized class so you have an idea of something to follow to realize why I have to go to the OEM standard.
Right.
Although they do have a couple of specific OEM classes they've been doing lately, which is now like the Honda classes. Those are Honda standards, not iCar. I love when people say, well, what does All-Data or iCar say? All-Data has permission to regurgitate or repeat OEM information in a spot. Same thing with iCar. They're repeating the information so you can get it. There's not a standard or it's not their practice. It's like, that's what they said. And iCar says it all the time to this day from when they first started years ago in the 80s. It's follow the OEM recommendations first. And they've even gotten away from saying, we'll make a business decision. You can't anymore. You really can't.
No. And see, the other thing, too, about that, Larry, is that they said follow the OEM recommendations, and where those OEM recommendations don't exist, you go back to iCar. You've got to go back because they're assuming that that gap is going to maybe, in some examples, be filled by the training that iCar has provided.
Right. So I want to encourage everyone to make sure that you do print and have and hold and love all three of the guide to estimatings for each of those systems. Read them, learn them, love them, get to know them, revisit them frequently. Make sure that they become your guiding light, because the premises that start before we get into the body operations or by panel operations really guide the whole estimate. You know, when I started, we hand wrote. And I was so super excited the first time I got hired.
With a chisel on a piece of stone.
And it was, yeah, it was bad. But I was so excited when I got hired and went to corporate because I was going to finally get to touch my first computerized estimating system. And dang it, Roger, you made me handwrite for another week. before I could actually touch a computerized estimating system. And the value of that is we really had to learn the guides, and we learned how those guides affected, and we learned that just what we clicked wasn't enough, that there was a lot of extra labor we were going to have to do.
Exactly.
So let's take a few things. Obviously, you know, we only got in a 1-hour class. We can't get into everything. A few things that the three of us see kind of commonly misestimated or missed completely and not even calculated.
Absolutely.
That can help repairers, insurers, everyone when you're learning how to use the guide to estimating. And the first thing we're going to start off with is weld zone and adjacent panel damage. Larry, you and I talk about this one often when we're meeting with people. Walk us through it and talk to us about what it is and then how we're kind of commonly missing it or misinterpreting it on our estimates.
The problem comes in is like Mike Anderson does the same thing I do in my class. We talk about panels, and we don't show the quarter panel, we show the inner structure. And it's like if I'm replacing the quarter at this location, and this location, and obviously on the mating flanges, how many other panels am I touching? Because too many times they get fixated on the area where you weld and you're putting body filler, you know, in the sectioning joint. Or in the, up in the sail panel down on the rocker or something like that, or sometimes you got the two of them in the window opening. And they get fixated or concentrated on that and don't realize that every flange that you resistance weld, do riveting on, rivet bonding type procedures, or some sort of combination, you're doing damage to the panels that it's attaching to.
On the backside, right?
On the backside of it, and in between the panels, you prep them usually to put some sort of corrosion-resistant material, weld-through primer in most cases. In some cases, they tell you to leave the factory coat, but on the panel that you took off, where the weld nuggets are, you have to do work there. If you have rivets, you're actually drilling holes out in many cases to get the rivets out, or using some sort of press. You still do damage to the inner panel. So now you have that inner panel you have to clean up, and then after you're done either putting rivets in or welding, you're going to have an issue where you have to clean this stuff up too, and you still have to put some sort of corrosion-resistant primer and a primer on top of it. It's almost like, and it's funny, I got to write an article and someone comes out with the procedure, one of the systems, and it's almost like it's a feather, prime, and scuff. Because on a mating flange, you don't have to block it because it's a finished off weld. You're just going to scuff it with a scuff pad so you can put paint on it. You have to abrade the primer so paint sticks to it. And then you have your feather block and primer we're also going to talk about, but that's where your areas are you put body filler. So you have, on a quarter panel, you have below the rocker, above the rocker in the door opening area, you have the entire dog leg door opening area. You have the back glass opening area. The biggest thing people miss usually is on the rear package tray or the gutter area, the trowel area back there, and you look underneath and you see that there's weld marks inside the trunk on the bottom of the panel they never seem to do. And then you have the rear body panel. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 layers back there. Then you have the floor extension. Sometimes rear body panel, you hit the rails because the rear body panel welds in front of the rail end cap. So you have a lot of different panels that you have to take care of and you have to allocate it. You might have 9 full panels, 2 sides,
2 sides is key.
Panels,
2 sides
or
is
20
key.
panels, and it may allow to maybe an hour to 2 hours, maybe in some cases, to when if I rivet everything and I'm riveting it on and I had to drill holes, now I have to deburr them and clean both sides. That might even be 2.5, 3 hours. So it's something you have to, and your tech has to do it. Your tech actually has. It's like I could skip it. It's like you know, oh, Larry.
Well, let's hope we're not skipping.
Right, you hope you're not skipping. It's like, Larry, well, you always talk about, you need 4, 5, 6 car washes. Well, we don't do that many. We do 2. You could skip a car wash. No one's going to die from it. It might be a little bit dirty. But if you don't do this, like we saw last month, we found where stuff was welded. Why? You didn't have to be a rocket scientist. You pull off a rubber, seal, and you pull a panel out of the way, and you see bare metal. Or weld-through primer on there, which doesn't work as a corrosion-resistant primer. So that's why we have to make sure we know what we're doing and how it's assembled and how we get to it.
Right, it's an important thing to remember because, like you said, this is something the techs have to do it right. It is not part of the quarter panel replacement time, and the tech needs to be compensated for that. So if I'm not as familiar with the vehicle, it may be something that as an estimator, I got to walk out after that quarter's off, have a meeting with my technician, look at everything he's got to do, discuss the time involved, and then come up with, like we said earlier, when it's those new and undamaged panels, we've got to figure out what the additional time needed is going to be and make sure that we estimate for that.
Yep.
Now, let's go a little bit deeper. So, in most times, I will say this, in most of my file reviews, shops never get this right. very, very rarely, unless it's one of your estimates, Larry, does this get right. We occasionally do a pretty good job when it comes to what we would call our weld seams. So the finished product that's facing the customer, we may occasionally remember to get a little extra here. But let's walk through, after I've done all my attachments, my flanges, the front and the back side, well, I'm still not done with possible additional labor, right?
Well, if you look at this picture here, you have a couple of good things that are being shown here. This happens to be a BMW. It's a rivet bond procedure to put the panel on, and they give you a specific sleeve that gets bonded in, and that's their filler. And the reason the filler never shrinks is because it's a high quality filler from BMW, but you also have to use their heat lamp to actually cure it at different temperatures for a certain amount of time. But this is bonded in, this isn't welded. I still have a repair to both the black area, which is the E-coat, and to this white area here, which is the existing panel on the car. Doesn't matter if I weld it or I bond it in, that's still, it's not a weld zone damage. Weld zone damage, adjacent panel damage, what they're talking about in the P pages is if I were welding the flanges, it's the inner panel. Here, it's an outer panel, it's cosmetic repair after I'm done dressing my welds, or what you call grinding them. And now I have to do a repair. And because everything's based on a new undamaged panel, and you have to get it back to the fact that it can actually be painted, I have factory E-coat on my new panel, but now it's been taken off, so I can put my fillers on there, my adhesives in this case, or even welding. Now I have to restore it back to the way I got it, back to the factory quality E-coat, both on the existing panel and the new panel. So I'm going to have my acid etch or wash primer, whatever the paint company is requiring that I use, or you just go right to some sort of mix of the two, which would be an epoxy primer that's in there, or an acid etch with epoxy on top of whatever they're telling you to do from your paint company. And then I'm going to put my primer surfacer. The primer surfacer is your feather block and prime issue there, and that's where you're going to get that in. And then the feather prime and scuff would be around the flange area, where we can see some of these rivets here that I have to clean up that flange area on the outside and on the inside. And you never put filler on those areas. In this case, this filler can be on there because it's an adhesive filler, but you don't put body filler on there because it can rub off from friction with the whatever top coat you put on there. It can rub off from friction, so you don't put material on there. So this is important for the estimators or damage assessors to understand, because they don't know what the tech's doing sometimes. It's almost like there needs to be a class on these guys just sitting there watching the guy repair the car, so they know what goes on.
Well, watching the right guy repair the car.
Yes.
That would be key.
So in your 3 databases, what they're considering is leveling this body filler off, but they tell you where it's going to. In 2 databases, they tell you it's up to 150 grit sandpaper. There's still a void there because your paint times, if you jump to the paint times next, you're still leaving out what they call in the databases. Remember, it's for replacement of parts, not judgment time. It's saying to feather, prime, and block. This is what they're talking about. And even if I have areas like this down here, where you can see in this area on the rivet, we have removed the E-coat. We now need to build that E-coat back up and level it back off with a primer product so that we can, once it's done, now we can apply our paint times accurately. If we don't consider that, we're leaving a step off.
Right, and keep it in mind here, this is additional labor that needs to be calculated, but there's also a lot of materials here, and etch primer's not cheap. So, and it's not factoring into those refinishing calculations.
The big thing is that they all say the same thing about feather, prime, and block. It stops at 150 your repair. It starts again at 400 as your refinish time. So what you really need to do is you need to have your area set up the right way, calculate what you have to do. Audatex does have a calculation in it for a certain amount of time to be added to the feather block and prime, but you got to remember you have to put a labor unit, excuse me, an amount for the materials, so it calculates materials also in there. Everyone else, you have to hand write it in yourself or manual entry and figure it out.
All right, so we got a question coming in, and before we jump to the next section, it's not telling me who the question is from, but it said, should we as an industry hold the STRS guide to estimating as our best practice for wording to use on estimates? Is there another guide we can use to standardize our wording in estimates? And I got to tell you, I love that STRS guide to estimating. Larry, you and I hand it out at every class we teach. It's the first thing we put in a shop's hands. You want to talk a little bit about what that guide is in case there's people watching that aren't familiar with it?
Well, it can't be worth anything good because it's free.
Ah, that's true.
So, you know, if it's free, it's not good. So you can go to the SCR website and you can download it for free. So obviously, no one should get it because it's free. You know,
let's keep it our secret.
Yeah, it's got to be a secret. Yeah, SCRS should actually put a $500 tag on it, and everyone will buy it.
I think Aaron and the board might be happy with you right now.
Yeah, right. It's like, well, I was going to be the salesman for it. Well, if Jake was here, we'd have product placement.
Exactly.
The thing you have to remember is that, yes, STRS is there. Does STRS want to be involved in that? I don't know. Do we want to be involved in coming up with best practices? Or I hate this whole thing of let's change things and make best practices. Let's take a page out of the manual and make a position statement out of it. Nobody wants to read or do anything. In this case, though, there is a slight argument I have to agree with.
Yep.
Because there's redundant stuff between the 3 database systems that does need to be clarified better. Should they come to us? Should they go to STRS? Should STRS and us get together and say, yeah, well, guess what? We're going to have to volunteer our time for that. You know, and what's the end game for us? Okay, well, we want to make the whole industry better. Well, guess what? Maybe we have to put some stuff into that. Maybe ICAR can be involved in it, or Jason, myself, and Aaron, and maybe two or three insurance personnel sit down, and we all argue and fight over it, and somebody pays for dinner, and we figure out probably 7 or 8 topics, paragraphs that have to be changed to make.
You're paying for dinner.
I got to pay for it?
Yeah,
I got a Lugas cut, so we're going to pay Lugas. So, I mean, it's a good thing to come up, but I hate all this word standardization. I think more or less, and best practices is probably a better word, because best practices just means we're all going to practice this idea. It's not a standard. Standard is the lowest acceptable amount. That's what a standard, and I hate the word standard. That's why you're better off having a best practice.
For those of you that don't know, the guide to estimating that STRS puts out actually goes in and addresses the gaps. So it takes by panel of the vehicle or by operation, whether you're welding or whatever. It's color coded. It's super great. If you print it in color, it's great to have, but a little pricey. But it breaks down what's left out. So it's finding those gaps in the system, some of the things that we're talking about today, and then helping shops organize that on your estimating. It's almost like a really great checklist that you go to before you finalize that estimate. They update that frequently. They work with the database providers. Obviously, STRS is one of the people that helps support the DEG, and Arthur, I think he's probably one of the hardest working guys in the industry with the database inquiries. Yep. But some sort of standardization to the wording that we put on estimates as estimators, whether we're an insurer or whether we're a shop. I'm a fan of that. I mean, I think the more nomenclature type stuff we get used to calling things, and we call them repetitively the same thing over and over, well, then that helps bring out, I don't want to say a standardization, Larry, but more of a familiarity and an acceptance of what's going on. So, I mean, I use that guide frequently. I refer to it. I hand it out to every shop I work with. I hand it out in every class that we teach. It's a great thing. It is on the STRS website. Scroll down a little bit, you'll see a picture of the front of the guide. You can click on it, and they give that away for free. It is fantastic.
I mean, bottom line, know what the nomenclature means, know that you have supportive information to document why that nomenclature is being used, so it supports your position when you prepare your estimate.
Right. So let's talk about something that's coming up on the forums, the Facebook forums and groups a lot lately, Larry. I think you and I spend way too much time on there. We're going to have to learn to back off a little bit.
I'm sitting and built to Facebook. It's like 40 hours a week for me.
Right.
I just do.
But seam sealer, which in some of the databases they refer to as caulking, which
is like for bathtub, which annoys me. I can't stand it. And that's another thing that I'll do for free. I'll argue with the database companies. Get rid of the word caulking, because you don't go to Home Depot to buy it. It's seam sealer, and a lot of them, I mean, there's 2 different types of seam sealers. One can go over bare metal, one can go over cured, scuffed primers, and you really have to know what you have in your shop, and why make 2 of them? Right. Guys, let's just keep 1 of them. Okay, let's not have both, because you can mix them up.
The other thing, too, is that the car companies have, in some of their procedures, a specific product to be used, and that's the only one you should use.
Right, right. Now let's talk about the labor that's involved in that a little bit. So we've got, we're going to go through here's CCC's premise, basically saying caulking and seam sealer removal on welded panel replacements basically is included labor. Sprayable, there is going to be some setup time and
you got to practice it for the right fan.
Match the texture.
You got to realize you got the texture. You have the spray out, how far it goes. You have numerous air tools, like for the German companies, that have different types of tips that you actually, as you go back and forth, sometimes you have to go in little circles. You have to go back and forth in and out of the area that you're putting the material out. You kind of agitate it so that it gives that same appearance between the left side and the right side.
Yes.
What you have to remember is, on the welded panel replacement, they're all going to say the same thing. It's included the labor time, which maybe that needs some sort of look or investigation on it. But if you're repairing the bottom of a quarter panel to a rear body panel and it gets damaged and you're going to fix it, and you scrape off all that seam sealer, now it's open season. Now you have to come up, you've got to come up with a judgment call on how much time it takes to take off, how much time it needs to put back on. But none of them include material. And remember, it's not one set price for the material. Sometimes you can only buy one tube of it, and sometimes it's a moisture-based product that comes in a sealed tube because it's specific, and it's only good the second you open it up, and you only need 3 inches of the tube. That's it. It's no good anymore after that, usually, because it's moisture sensitive. Other ones can last a lot longer. So this is something that you really need to take into account.
So the database for CCC, bottom line, as opposed to the other two, is more specific on what they time studied. So if you have to spray it and set up your equipment and clean your equipment, that's a judgment call to take care of that missing step. That's the key. It's a missing step based on their database. This other thing, too, deals with the issue of if I replace parts brand new from the car companies, you know, for example, Toyota, if I can use that as an example, hoods, hatches, deck lids, and doors, they are lacking the seam sealer that the car that you're working on had. And so in that case there, the question comes up, was that considered in the time study of replacing that door on those model cars? The answer is no, based on their head notes and in their P pages or GTE guide. Right.
So it's kind of interesting. If it is a replacement part, so those bolt-on replacement parts that you're used to getting in CCC, that labor and material is not included. In Mitchell and Audatex, well, they say that labor is included.
On welded panels. And this is,
well, we're talking about the bolt-on replacement
panels. They're not coming up with a clear area there. And if you do look into the DEG, you'll see some of these things have been answered on there. So this is another one of those things where they need to clarify that a little bit better.
Right.
But not be so ambiguous.
Yeah, so just for that thing right now, we talk about those parts. Now, when we get into welded part replacement, so if we're talking about a rear body panel, an apron, a quarter panel, any of those operations, all 3 databases across the board pretty universally agree that the labor for that seam sealer is included. However, the material is not.
Well, no body materials included in anything. You have to have a separate line for body materials.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could get that cleared. I mean, some of this stuff being $30, $40 to $60 a tube, and it taking maybe 2 to 3 tubes. This isn't something that you're wrapping into your paint and material
no, you can't, because unless it would if you put it on the refinish time. It's not. It's a body labor time. This here is actually a few of them added together on one page, and this is actually it's from the DEG, but it's through STRS.
Repair-driven news, right?
Repair-driven news. Here you go again. No one signed up for it. It's free. But if you send me $39.95, I'll be more than glad to email it to you each morning, even though it's free. So I'll send that to you. And if you send me $500, I'll also send you the STRS free guide to estimating. So I'll be more than glad to do that for you. But this is free. You sign up for it. It comes out every day. It has some news information and stuff. But when the DEG gets the database systems to come up with a different procedure or a solution to something, Audi will put 3 or 4 of them together and throw them out there. This one happened to be on seam sealers, is exactly the way the article looks, with hyperlinks is the blue. If the database systems change something, he'll also put that out in an RDN article that says, hey, Mitchell changed this, or Audatex changed that, or CCC Motors changed this. So this really helps you out. Every morning you check it like you read your newspaper, you figure it out, and you can come up with what you have to here.
So if you're looking for this document here, Google it up and just type in repair-driven news, seam sealer.
And it'll come up.
And it'll come up. It'll be somewhere on that
first
page.
Yeah, it's one whole big listing for that particular day, and it's like the 3rd or 4th one down.
Yep.
So now, even like we talked a little bit about the sprayable applications, but even if we're dealing with a database provider, this is the labor for the seam sealer application itself is actually included. Well, there still may be some additional things that a shop may have to charge, extra for on the estimate or calculate labor time. And masking for seam sealer application is one of those. This one here kind of looks like a lowrider almost with the masking pattern.
It's not an included item to mask this off. And if you can see here, he has his primer on there. He's going to scuff it right before he's ready to put his material on there. But you can also see at the bottom end of this corner where the rear body panel meets up with the quarter extension, there's seam sealer there already, and you can see it's got a little half moon agitation to it. So as he goes to put this on, he's going to have to go and move it around. He has the other side to take a look at, and I know this shop actually takes pictures, Mid-Island, of what damage was there and how it was up, so they know how he's going to lay his seam sealer out again, and he makes these tape markings so that it doesn't spread all over the place and make a mess and give you nice sharp edges to it, so it appears the same way.
Just like factory.
But think about it. Think about the pride this tech's putting in. You got a bumper cover, and you got a tail light that goes in there. You're never going to see this. No one's going to, this isn't inside of a hood where you open up the hood and you look at the rail assembly. This is somebody taking his pride and putting it back to the pre-loss condition as best as humanly possible.
So all those beige marks there are the panel tape marked boundaries to keep that seam sealer within that given area.
Kind of like tracing it, yeah.
To replicate what the car company built in the first place.
Right. So, you know, masking for seam sealer is definitely something that you want to consider additional labor time for on your estimate. And texture matching at some point. Some of these textures for some of these seam sealer operations, we're cutting divots and filler paddles. We're using air hoses to spray out. We're using Scotch-Brite pads to try to, I mean, you know, 3M's got a whole lot of stuff online for ways to match and duplicate some of those different seam sealer things. But it takes time. It's almost like matching texture over in the paint department or doing a letdown panel, just like I'd be doing on a tri-coat or whatever. You know, the body guy's got just as much craftsmanship these days almost as the painter. Sorry, painters. But there's a lot to cover there.
So if you're looking for information on how to handle the seam sealer you're working with, you can type it into YouTube, type in the brand, go to the seam sealer section, and it'll give you directions on how to find, you know, solutions to apply the product properly.
Yeah. Now this is a great lead-in for us to talk about masking operations. So again, I think it's one of the most common things that I see, I don't want to say misestimated, almost not estimated at all. You know, as an industry, we got pretty good with masking and protection when we got over to the paint department, but we've completely forgot about it in the body department, and that's a lot of time, money, and a lot of things that technicians are putting in.
And let me just preface this. This piece that we're getting into right now could be a couple hours long. My point, though, is we're going to give you some highlights of the whole thing so that you can think about these things and see where there's maybe missed opportunity for you. So, Larry, take it away. What have you got here?
What happens with this triage, pre-measuring type of stuff, pre-scanning, although not everybody talks about pre-measuring, which is one of the most important things, and you're going to do this whole, 100% tear down. What do you do with all these parts? And people love to buy parts carts and everything like this and all this cool stuff, but there's other things you're doing at the same time, such as you have all these removed components sitting on a cart so they don't fall off. This shop here, two of the shops I deal with, Exclusive Auto Collision in Mid-Island, they wrap the cart so these parts don't fall off as they move them along. And you can actually see on this cart, there's other stuff that's in there with this blue tape, and here's one of them off to the side. It's a headlamp. Now this headlamp is undamaged. Now the car's going to sit waiting for parts because this is the disassembly process, and you're waiting for parts to come in and maybe even some structural stuff to be replaced. Well, guess what? We're going to wrap this headlight in bubble wrap, or even a full door assembly. I didn't have a picture there of one, but a full door assembly with the door trim panel on it. You take it off to be able to blend out the side. They're going to bubble wrap that so it stays protected. They got big, huge rolls of bubble wrap, and you're going to wrap that up. And you might want to call this a car cover or wrapping or masking, whatever terminology you're going to use. But what are you doing it for? So that I don't wreck the stuff that's in the car. Nothing worse than when you walk into a shop and you see brand new leather seats, and I don't care if it's on a Toyota Camry or a Bentley Continental GT Coupe.
Just
sitting
open
on the floor. And you know someone's going to sit on it and probably damage something on it, but you got to, or they pile stuff on it. That's another favorite thing. But you got to put plastic on top of it. You got to protect it and make sure it doesn't get damaged. You don't want to overspray to ruin some of these panels. I mean, in some cases, the door trim panels, even on a Toyota Camry, are more money than the door assembly, fully loaded with everything in it.
Right, and harder to get. A lot of times door trim panels are what's on back order or whatever. And these headlamps these days, we looked at a new Kia that's coming out, and just the headlamps and the fog lamps on a $34,000 car, well, they're like $9,000 if I had to write them on an estimate. Well, the last thing I want to do is do damage to a $1,500 to a $2,000 headlight while it's sitting in my shop for the 2 or the 3 weeks that it's going to get there. And as an insurer, man, I don't want to pay for that headlight again.
Think about it. Yeah. The insurance company doesn't want to pay for damages that didn't exist from the actual event. And so when I'm disassembling that car, anything I take off that car becomes very vulnerable. Think about this. When you get your parts in your parts department, they don't ship them unboxed. They put them in a box, and it's done for a reason. So anything I pull off that car, I want to make sure that proper care is given to those so they don't become damaged. If I take off a door or a fender, I don't want to damage that paint surface, so a technique like this would be needed.
Right, we're going to take care of it. And that's masking that takes place over in the body shop. I've got material, and I've got labor involved in that.
Right.
And we very rarely seen it taken care of. So masking for protection, and masking for protection comes into play for a lot of different operations. Here, Larry, you've got a rivet bonding operation. Talk us through what it means when we mask for protection.
Well, yeah, in this particular case, this technician took some welding blankets that he has that is specified up at the top there too, going onto the roof panel. He has these specified just for rivet bonding applications, metal filings and stuff like that. We have other ones that are for welding purposes. And then he also used some of the 3M Spark paper because he doesn't want to get a lot of that glue that sometimes drips or gets all over the place to get on certain components and not see it and cause an issue later on.
You mean like that last car we looked at,
yes,
where it was
like
just scooped up on the weld house?
Yep,
yeah, okay.
That's it. And so he utilized this. You can probably utilize paper at times with masking paper or even booth plastic. In some cases, in this particular situation, this tech did this job this way to protect these components so that nothing would get in the way of damaging other components that are in there. And remember, if you're doing a rivet bonding procedure, you don't have to remove the whole interior or a lot of the interior like you have to on a welded procedure because you got sparks flying all over the place. In this case, you don't have sparks. You have some metal filings and stuff you have to clean up and clean out of the way.
You know, when people hear about welding blankets, they just think that they're taking a cloth and throwing it over something. No. When you're actually working on the insides of the vehicle, you have to work hard to make that blanket work and do the job it's supposed to.
He's got this blanket jammed up in some areas on the backside there, so he closed out these windows and the door opening area so that, you know, it stays protected and stuff like that. And in this case, you can see there's some foam inserts that are in there that he's going to have to put some adhesive on those before he puts it on. There's a big foam adhesive down on the bottom of the quarter panel, rocker panel area. And because he's not welding, a lot of this becomes a little bit easier with the rivet bonding type procedures than it would with welding, where you got to remove a lot more stuff and watch for fires.
Now, as it was mentioned earlier, what was overlooked the most when you replace a quarter panel is the back side of the panels. These techniques could also be used to help protect those areas when you're going to prime those edges. So it's not just for the welding process, but it's also for the application of protection that's needed on those parts that restore the corrosion protection.
Yeah, I mean, as we go through the operations, whether it's actually the panel attachment or corrosion protection, I may mask and unmask that car in the body department 3 to 4 to 5 times to do it properly and keep all different sorts of overspray or welding shavings or sparks or anything from going anywhere. That's a lot of material. That's a lot of time. Obviously, the welding blankets I'm going to be able to reuse, but you know, Larry, we talk about it all the time. I love 3M Spark paper, but man, it ain't cheap.
No, it's not cheap. And I love Icon, all their videos, they use it like it's wallpaper.
I mean, think about this for those of you that are watching. You're looking at your cycle time right now and your hours per day on your reviews. My point here is this: are you going to be professional and do it the right way, which might take a bit more time? Or are you going to rush it through and then have an outcome like we did in the last show and see an inspection take place like somebody like Larry, where things weren't done correctly because it was rushed through?
Right.
So that's something to consider.
Right. It's just a matter of, you know, we want the technicians to do it right.
Yep.
And our technicians deserve to be compensated to do it right. And so I think no matter what side of this fence you sit on, ultimately we want a safe and accurate repair for either our policyholder or the customer that's brought the car. And if it takes the right amount of labor to ensure that that technician does the right job. So we can't expect them to do it for free. I don't work for free. Larry,
No.
You guys don't work for free either. So we got to make sure that everybody gets what they need. Let's talk a little bit about masking for drill shavings. And I've got a great case that's come up recently where this just cost an insurer $8,000 on a claim for not, you know, I guess for the shop as well, for not taking the precautions that they needed to do. But walk us through this, Larry.
On this particular vehicle, got hit in the lower A-pillar and stuff, and obviously an aluminum car, it's a certified car. He's got the interior out, he's got to fix a bunch of stuff on the inside. He just took out the welding blanket that he had in there to catch a lot of the shavings, and he was vacuuming it off, and he had the plastic to cover for any dust floating around, even though he's got a vacuum system right above his head. And then you can see here the front hub assembly only has paper on it and tape. He didn't need the 3M Spark paper in this particular case because that's going to get ripped off afterwards, because what is he doing here? He's just doing some riveting and some bonding and stuff like that, and it's not going to drip straight down on it. So use some paper like that. So, I mean, you just want to make sure you cover the areas. And once again, this is easier because you don't have to worry about fires. With fire stuff, that wire harness would be a hell of a lot further out of there. There'd be more stuff off the, well, you don't see the inside of the dashboard, out of the inside of the dashboard. There'd be more sanding on the backside areas to remove anything that could catch on fire. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into the differences between something that's welded on versus something that's riveted or rivet bonded.
You know, and the setback of that wiring loom is not included with the backside refinishing, so that has to be considered in your judgment call also.
Yeah, a lot of different things that happen. So like I say, one of my pet peeves when I go in and do a reinspection and I start to peel back the layers is to find all the shavings just still left under the carpet where there was just like no care. And you know, the customer, we think they're not going to see it. a shop vac or something, but especially when we're dealing with more and more, and as time goes by, we're going to see more and more hybrid type vehicles, high electricity vehicles, the bolts coming out. And we've got a situation where a shop didn't take care and police all those shavings. It happened to be on the side where the battery modules and all that were. And what does high electricity become? Well, it becomes a magnet. So as it pulled all those shavings in, it shorted out that whole system, and it ended up costing that repair facility about $8 grand.
And the other thing you want to consider too is that if you have dissimilar metals, I mean, you have an aluminum part here, a steel part here.
You got to vacuum.
You can't have this steel laying on top of that aluminum, otherwise it'll start creating a problem. And it's the worst thing is it's hidden. You don't want to hide that stuff and leave it in those chambers because it will cause a problem at a later date.
There's just another angle of just a welding blanket. The whole entire back interior is out. We throw in this welding blanket in there. You can see actually some dirt and shavings on there. And these all get vacuumed afterwards.
Right.
Okay, we got one of the detail guys that just goes around and he vacuums, you know, these things off at the end of the day, gets a little extra money to stay a little late, but he makes sure the vacuum clean because you don't want to take this nice blanket and throw it on something else.
And scratch it.
And that's why, you know, we have welding blankets and we have rivet blankets, because the rivet ones are easy to clean off. The welding ones get burn holes in them. So you want to make sure you do check them out that way. And they do need to be rotated in and out.
Yeah, and again, this is a situation where this is a reusable, you know, piece of equipment. I can't think of any shop that doesn't probably have about 30, 40, or 50 of these laying
just
around.
Piled up, yeah.
And we do eventually have to throw some out, and they become moving blankets at that point. But there's labor involved in this. The protection of the interior, the protection of the car. You know, there's the tech's got a few tenths of here and there of hanging this stuff up.
And it adds up. It really does. It's time you got to do.
I mean, reconsider this. So when you paint something, when your painter's painting something, that painter is also performing setups of that equipment. They're basically cleaning it after they're done with it. They're setting it up. Well, the same thing's happening here. When you're removing this off the welding blankets so that it doesn't contaminate the next car or cause damage to the next car, that's just like a setup and paint.
Yeah, that's a great point, Roger. We address cleanup time and some of that stuff in the refinishing time. We give the technician time to do that. We don't really address that in body time.
No, they don't. You need to take a mental. Here's another example here. That other car that he's welding on. He's got the 3M spark paper across the back area here. As you can see, he's got the trunk rubber that he's tried on a few times, so he just laid it up there to make sure the trunk was lined up during his trial fitting of it and stuff, to make sure everything lined up properly and had the right gaps. But, you know, once again, another usage of spark paper that's in the area. You notice he uses a little bit of tape, even though it's got a sticky background. He uses some tape to hold it in place. This all takes time, and there's some money involved in it.
Yeah, there's
well, it's not free.
there.
You don't want hot sparks going back there.
No,
because if they
you
go
don't
back
fall
there,
down.
they'll be burning off the protective coatings on that back side of the steel, and you're going to have a corrosion problem.
Yeah.
So that's why it's got to be sealed off tight. I mean, any of you that were techs in the audience ever weld and have something run down your boot, same damage. It causes damage to you. It causes damage to the car.
I highly recommend not welding in a V-neck shirt.
No, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, always wear a jacket.
Exactly.
You know,
There's a quarter panel going on, and there's some, you know, fitting up of the rear door. He's just trying that out to make sure it fits right. He just put this door on. I shut the door over to get some pictures of it. He came back and did his, you know, rest that he had to do and line it up, and then he took the door back off and finished his welding. But you can see this 3M spark paper, the blanket I moved out of the way when he put the door on. There's a blanket inside the car, and this is the same one with that package tray that had the 3M spark paper, and you notice it's on the rotor again, not to cause any, you know, welding damage or sparks or anything to get in there that can cause an issue later on. So you know, you really have to take a look at the amount of work that he did to this.
Yeah, and that's time and money that, you know, when we think about the replacement time, I always hear a lot of techs tell me, well, it's not enough time. Well, it really is enough time if you understand the database, understand what that labor time actually includes, what it doesn't include, and then you make sure that you're getting compensated for it on the estimates. And as an estimator, well, that's my job, is to make sure that my technicians are compensated and that my estimate accurately reflects everything that we're going to do to that car to get it back to where it needs to be so I can deliver it back to the customer. So as you can see in the body shop side, we spend a lot of time masking. We got material, we got labor, and we very rarely ever see it actually properly written for on estimates. This is one of those things where you're usually accused of being the only one. But that adds up at the end of the year, and that comes straight out of the shop owner if he's having to cover all those expenses. Now, let's get into the paint booth a little bit, Larry. Traditionally, as a shop, we do okay when it comes to thinking about masking and operations for when it's in the paint booth. But there are some additional considerations that leave, you know, kind of in the guidance to estimating where a shop may need additional time.
Well, you got to realize if you're using a, you know, there's a couple different things to look at. You have your masking up to 36 inches, and then the rest of the car would be anything past 36 inches would not be included, which means you're going to wrap the whole car like a Christmas gift after 36 inches with more paper. No one does that. You're going to put a car cover for refinishing. In this particular case, a lot of shops are now going with this. We're going to use the plastic, and we're going to actually fill door openings and panels. Now, the rest of the car, the entire car, is an included operation for putting the car cover
with
on the car in
yep.
Audatex, but not the material. CCC and Mitchell, no, it's not included, so you could charge whatever you're going to charge, a dollar amount, and then the labor time to put the car cover on. But the door openings, which they all seem to agree about, are glass openings, they have that little chart that they show you in the P pages
yep.
of 0.2, 0.2, 0.3 for the front and rear. The little glass ones, you'd have to come up with a time yourself. But you can see here, this particular shop here, which is our buddy Brad's shop. Yeah, I stole him from his website because he does a really nice job.
Good old Southerner.
Another Southerner,
yeah.
very small shop. And, you know, this car here, he's obviously doing a repair over there. I think that's Brad's. This one I know is Brad's. This one's here is more blending. And he's got the doors off the car, and he's got the glass. You know, he's doing it the way the factory says, all the way up, you know, clearing out everything so it's all taken care of. And you can see the masking that he went into versus our traditional maskings here, which some shops still do. Okay, this one here, you got the back glass taken out, and they taped off of the urethane. Same thing with the side glass. The gas doors out. Notice the back taping on the flange area here for the tire opening. Notice the holes in the tail lights are actually covered with tape, and the vent in the back is also covered with tape, and the trunk opening was covered with tape. So this shop took the care to mask all this stuff off, and in some cases you can use plastic, in other cases you can't. Here's another shop here that was doing priming, and he's using traditional paper. So once again, whatever you're comfortable with, either doing it, you know, the plastic way, or doing it with the paper, or some sort of mix. Some of these things are not included. I know Brad, for a fact, shows a lot of people online for free how to do the masking of the plastic on the door openings. He's got a really cool trick the way he does it, snaps it in place, and I mean, you can, depending on the thickness of the plastic, you could probably bounce a ball off of it.
And I'm sure you're going to be challenged with some of those people that say, well, you're the only one asking for these things, but let's go back to something. When you take a look at those that don't even consider this in the repair process, what kind of overspray are they getting inside the car, on the interior trim, the trunk mats, and so on? And the Armada we had here in the last show, they had part of the carpet painted. I mean, so those are the things that help provide a positive outcome. You get great CSI, not only for the repairer out there, but also for those that are paying the bill. They don't want overspray. They don't want burn damage. They want their car back like it was before the wreck.
What does it take you to clean that off?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, you know, you got to work on, there's just some things you can't do these days with paint. God love it. It's advanced and it's done what it has, but it's not what we were working with 30, 40 years ago.
Wait, they don't make that directional paint?
Nope.
No.
Goes where you want it to?
Nope.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Or self-spraying paint or anything like that?
No,
you just put it next to the car and it automatically just kind of goes on the car?
There is no Harry Potter version of paint right now. But those hard lines that we traditionally had worked with in the past, you know, the warranties that the manufacturer is asking for, the warranties that the paint companies are willing to give, they're just not allowing that.
No, you got to clear with panels, you know, edge, or, you know, and sometimes a break point. And that's another thing I'd like to see clarified by certain people. And obviously, I'll just write another article on it. But a panel's edge is the end of the panel, and then obviously, you know, a break point, you really need to have them clarify what they're doing with that. But you have to make sure that your paint is adhered to everything. And how many times do we walk into a spray booth and there's shiny spots and the paint isn't adhering properly? And they might have everything masked up right, but that's going to cause a problem later on. So, you know, we're not talking about paint procedures or anything, but, you know, I know that's another show we're going to have, but follow the paint company's recommendations on scuffing and sanding it so it's right, not just only your masking that you have to do.
Right, you know, that's another point, and we'll cover it in a different day, but we have some colors now that require panel prep to 1200. So, you know, if I'm looking at a blend panel or on some of these things, some of these color codes.
And you got to stand in one direction.
Yeah, one direction and 1200, and that's definitely not accounted for in the refinish guidelines.
No, I think that's going to change also.
So that's something else to look at.
So let me throw this back to the audience again. When you come across the questions that are just being discussed now, was this considered in the time study? You reach out to the DEG. DEGweb.org is your source for your voice to be heard, so the database providers can be held accountable to look into these things.
Yeah. All right, so let's, you know, when we opened the show, we talked about that the database is built on new and undamaged parts.
Correct.
Going on new and undamaged vehicles. So basically, when I decide to make a repair to the panel, well, the guide's out the window. and nothing really, even from the refinishing times to any operation, applies anymore. And that comes into play a lot of times when we're talking about body repair. So I'm now fixing metal, putting filler on, and I'm going to do some painting. And we've got a lot of gaps there. There's a lot of misunderstanding, whether it's partial paint reductions or blend within or some of the other things that are going on out there. But let's talk through feather, prime, and block and how that works when a technician is going to make a repair to a panel.
Well, the thing you want to consider first is that your refinishing times are based on a new undamaged panel, which meant it looked like an E-coat. It had that kind of outcome, straight, and it had some type of primer applied to it to build your paint on top of. This document here has been overlooked for many years. It came out 11 years ago. I was on this committee for CIC at the time. The process went and started in 2005, and this outcome was developed in 2006. So if you do not know about this document, go back to CIC and look this up. This is for feather, prime, and block. This is for the repair side of the equation. When feather, prime, and block is mentioned in the estimating guides, that's for the replacement of parts, welded parts, and adjacent panel damage. This one here is for the repair side. So if I am taking this up to, the question is, what does the technician have to restore that part of repair to, which tells us right here is in 150 grit paper, to a condition of a new undamaged part, and our valid required steps in this process. So from there it says this feather, prime, and block operation moves from the 150 grit position to allow it to be leveled off to that of a new undamaged part.
Right, so there's a lot of stuff that's going to be involved in there. There's additional labor, there's material, there's a lot of consumables that just aren't calculated
Correct.
into any other operation, and that stuff's expensive. I mean, I always want to grab a couple of people from my old days, put on the insurance hat and go, let's go down to the jobber and buy a few gallons of stuff and let me tell you what it's going to take for me to get through this.
And that's why it said the materials were not considered in this assessment. It was only for the judgment of time involved.
Right.
Materials are always something separate. Body materials, tape, body filler, razor blades, applicators, whatever the case may be, sandpapers are not included in that. And what shops have to realize is that you have to come up with some sort of calculation or your own time test study. You want a little bit of a guide for it, you can Google my name with feather, block, and prime, or Google Mike Anderson's name with feather, block, and prime. We both wrote articles. We both discussed how we were going to take two different aspects of looking at the articles. I did a slightly different one between body and refinish labor. Mike did one under refinish labor. So it's two different aspects to look at it. You choose which way you want to try and do it, but that would be also some sort of a suggestion or idea to go down and say which way you want to go with this and how you want to do it, because, you know, from 150 grit to that of an undamaged panel, which technically would be an unscuffed panel at 400, right. You're missing, in most cases, 180, 220, 320, your priming, well, your wax and grease remover, your primer.
Application of guide coat.
You know, your guide coat application, and your sanding of it of maybe 180 or 220, 320, I don't care if you're doing it wet or dry, and then you're gonna go to your 400. And that can go, like Kristen said before, all the way up to 1200, depending on the paint company, and which way you sand it. So these are things you have to realize. You also have to realize I'm not always coating the whole panel, so I also have to be careful on where I'm stopping the blending of the primer into the painted panel and how much I have that scuffed, because you don't want all that stuff peeling back off again. No. Or you don't want to do the, and I can't stand when guys do this, they do the flop with the paper and they wind up with a hard line. It doesn't look like it, but after it's painted, you see a line. It's like, where'd that line come from? Well, because you put a hard line in there with the thing and you didn't block sand it out right. And this, because it's cosmetic, it's a block sand versus we talked before on the flange edges where you're doing a scuff. So it's a feather, prime, and scuff. This is a feather, block, and prime. You got to block it out so it gives you visual aspect that it looks smooth.
So high visibility, feather, prime, and block. Non-visibility, maybe a prime and a scuff.
Yep.
Right. Feather edge too. Feather edge, prime, and scuff.
This is definitely an operation that we don't see estimated properly enough, that we see a lot of pushback out in the field operations. There's a lot of people struggling to get this point across, because I believe it's a misinterpretation on the other side of that equation on what this does and doesn't do. But you know, pretty clearly the guides to estimating, all three systems address feather, prime, and block. They all three address the gap that ends with the dent repair and then now needs to get it ready to go into the paint department. And someone has to do that. Now maybe your body tech, that may be your painter that picks up from there, but there's definitely a gap. And I think at some point we kind of hurt ourselves a little bit. For years we just added it to the time. Oh, I'll just add a little bit extra here.
Yeah, when it was added in the time, but here's the defining difference. in the last 7 or 8 years, they came out with the EPA, which is called the 6H rule. So you can look that up. Google it online, 6H rule. What it tells the collision repair industry is that sprayable products need to be in a controlled environment to have an outcome of success for that to meet that requirement. So with that said, this started to break up the duties between the collision repair tech performing all the straightening repair processes, but then closing that gap up to finalize it so I can take it to paint. And typically that was done in a different department other than the metal area.
Yeah, and that goes back to a point. We had an EPA guy here a couple of years ago that basically said the 3-ounce cup rule wasn't an excuse. You can't do 12 3-ounce cups.
Right.
So you know that a lot of us thought that was our okay to get away with it in the body department, and it's not. And in fact, if I walk into a shop that is doing that, that doesn't mean they're right, and I'm not going to use them as my standard of which I judge every other shop in town by, or in that market, or define the market, or whatever we do. And then we got to jump back to that original premise at the beginning. The OEM standard is the standard, and you must be qualified before you can be considered the standard.
Correct.
And so this may be something that you have to pass on if it's a certain vehicle or not. So what we do love is that the guides have given us really all the information we need to be negotiating what is the correct amount to get paid. It's just learning to read them, use them, and apply them. We could be here all day.
Well, the big problem is read.
That's true.
Nobody
We want an
wants to
instant answer, but we've forgotten how to do that. I think some of us have got lulled into the point and click, and we think if we click it, that's the amount. That's what the system says it owes, and we're missing some of those additional things.
The estimator has to be highly skilled to perform an outcome of success for this industry to be properly compensated for the things that we're pointing out here today.
Yeah.
You got to be a para engineer in a way.
Yeah.
Like a paralegal helps out a lawyer, you got to be a para engineer. You got to understand the engineering principles.
Correct.
And the repair processes. Even though you may not be able to physically actually do them, you might actually have to know how to explain them or why they need to be done.
Right.
Yep.
Now, there's a lot of things in my shop I can buy. I can buy phenomenal welders. I can go through lean process training. I can get my green belt, black belt, blue belt, whatever it is. And those things will help save me money, but nothing I do as a shop owner makes me money other than the amount of what's written on those estimates, because that's determining what checks are going to come in the front door. So estimating is definitely something that should be a major focus in just about every facility across the country. And for adjusters and independent adjusters out there, knowing your estimate system, knowing what's included, what's not included, well, you know, Roger, you and I talk about this all the time. It's kind of your job.
It is your job.
What you were hired for.
It is the job.
Was to know that system.
And it is the job for the estimator to know what's going on in the repair processes so they can apply the strategies properly to the estimate outcome. Bottom line.
Right.
So it requires that estimator not just to be a salesperson, but to be highly skilled to get these outcomes of success.
Yeah, I think nothing frustrates me more. I take it personal when I have an adjuster come in that does another estimating system. It hurts my feelings really bad, it does. I almost feel like I failed in some way. I was a bad trainer or something went wrong. So guys, you got any parting thoughts? We're over our limit. We've hit our hour. Like we said, we could talk about this for days. Any parting thoughts on the guides, understanding the guides, and how to use them in writing an estimate?
Well, I wouldn't print them out. I'd download them, read them. If you need to print out at least one copy, print it out. When you do discuss something or need to prove something, or you feel the need that you have to prove something to somebody, you can print out that one page, highlight it, or you can actually copy and paste it into a lot of the database systems as far as remarks, and that'll be right underneath there, so you don't even have to print it out. It's on your repair estimate or your invoice or whatever the case you're doing, so that might make it easier for you.
Right.
The one thing I want to stress is that when you're looking at these P pages or GTE pages or reference guide is that it's generic for all vehicles on the road. It doesn't pick out a specific model. What does define the model of the car, you will find footnotes in your database that will give you extra insight on how that time applied for that part should be used. So it makes you look for different things that you need to basically say, oh, I see they didn't include this, I'm going to take action. Keep in mind, P pages, GTE pages are for all vehicles. Vehicle specific is based on when you pull up that car by VIN number.
Right, and find some, or in the repair procedures when you go and get them on every car, every time I'm going to go get the OEM procedures and look at them. So one of the recommendations I always have for shops is one of our favorite things to do, and we started doing this in the insurance industry 10, 15 years ago, was we would take our estimators out and do consensus building training, and that's great, and you need to do that too. But I highly recommend that at least once a month you do some sort of lunch and learn, some sort of internal learning where your estimators and your technicians get together. You pick one section out of the database that's more most commonly used in your repair facility. For many of you, that's probably going to be CCC. Pick one section, go to that part, meet as a team, talk about it, let the technicians provide insights and feedback to the estimators. Let the estimators ask questions. Just go bumper to fender to headlights. Just go through the database and start to have conversations and open up the dialogues and look at what maybe you're missing. And those little things is what makes a difference at the end of the year on the bottom line. So it's great. Well, don't forget to join us next week. We have had a small change. We're still in the process of constructing the paint booth. So our next class for April was going to be translucent finishes and matching OEM. We're going to move that class a little bit down for a couple months while we finish up the construction on the booth. Next month, we will be addressing OEM repair procedures. So it's a great class. We're going to go OEM by OEM. Throughout the year, talk about what's new for their models, what you need to know specifically about repairing those cars, how to find the information for the OEM, and then more importantly, how to interpret, read it, and apply it to the repair that you're working on. So be sure to tune in next month for the April edition of Repair University Live. And if you have any questions, well, you can always hit us on the website or hit us on the live stream feed with your questions where you're at. We'll see you next month.